Most folks at Ellie's diner didn't notice the man when he walked in. Just after 7 a.m., right on time like every other day, Walt Briggs opened the squeaky glass door and let the autumn chill follow him inside. The bell above jingled softly, a sound that once meant breakfast and company, now just routine. Walt moved slow, not out of weakness, but with the steadiness of someone who'd earned every creak in his joints. Dressed in a worn flannel shirt and jeans faded from time, he took his usual spot by the window without saying a word. What caught the attention of the younger staff wasn't his entrance. It was the ink barely visible under his rolled sleeve, a faded tattoo just above the wrist. To anyone who'd served it, was immediately recognizable the mark of the 2nd Recon Battalion, United States Marine Corps. But Chad, a server barely out of high school, had no such recognition. He elbowed a friend at the counter and snorted, "Looks like bar fight ink." His buddy laughed too loud, their voices echoing more than they should have. Walt didn't flinch. He had faced worse than teenage ridicule in his life, much worse. 3 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 prosthetic hip. Yet here in a sleepy diner in a quiet American town, the deepest cuts came from ignorance, not enemy fire. He placed his order the same as always, biscuits and gravy black coffee, no cream. Chad jotted it down with a half smirk, not even meeting his eyes. Around the room, the regulars sipped their drinks, glanced up briefly, then looked away. No one stepped in. No one said a word. Outside, maple leaves rustled in wind, piling like red and gold quilts along the sidewalk. Inside, the only music came from a scratchy jukebox playing an old Patsy Cline track. Walt sipped his coffee slowly. He didn't need to defend the tattoo. He didn't need to explain himself. That mark had been inked in a world far from here under a different kind of sky, one filled with sandfire and silence. It told a story that deserved more than a snicker. But Walt knew something most of them didn't. Silence has weight. And sometimes dignity speaks loudest when no one else is listening. Ethan Campbell had been sitting in the corner booth of Ellie's diner, the same one he visited most mornings before school, quietly sketching lines into his notebook. While the rest of the diner hummed with clinking silverware and idle morning chatter, his attention was fixed on something others had ignored: the faded tattoo on the forearm of an older man sipping black coffee by the window. Walt Briggs, 72 years old, a man of few words and many mornings spent in that same booth, didn't notice Ethan's pencil at first. The tattoo wasn't large or flashy. It was worn like the man himself, faded but unshaken. Most folks either overlooked it or, like the snickering young server, Chad and his friends made careless jokes. But Ethan saw something different. There was precision in that ink, purpose, and a silence around Walt that felt like it carried weight. Later that afternoon, curiosity still nagging at him, Ethan made his way to the Flagstone Public Library. The place was as quiet as his thoughts, filled with the scent of lemon polish and dust from forgotten shelves. Behind the front desk sat Ms. Albright, a retired high school teacher turned town librarian. She wore her silver hair tied in a loose bun, glasses slipping down her nose as she sorted through a stack of returned books. "What brings you in today, Ethan?" she asked, her voice warm but surprised. "I saw a tattoo this morning," Ethan replied, pulling the sketch from his notebook and laying it carefully on the desk. "On Mr. Briggs's arm. I think it means something." Ms. Albright leaned in, adjusting her glasses. Her eyes narrowed, then widened slightly. "Oh my, that's the insignia of the 2nd Reconnaissance Battalion Marines. That's no ordinary ink, Ethan. That's history." She disappeared into the back for a few moments, returning with a large manila folder marked Local Veterans. From it, she pulled a photocopied newspaper article dated June 1971. The headline read, "Corporal Walter Briggs awarded Bronze Star for valor." Below it was a grainy black and white photo of a young Marine standing at attention next to a senior officer. His expression was stoic, his posture sharp. "That's him," Ethan whispered, recognizing the jawline, the eyes, and the tattoo peeking from under the uniform sleeve. "He saved lives over there," Ms. Albright said softly, tapping the article. "Most folks don't remember. Walt doesn't talk about it, never has, at least not in here. But that day, the whole town lined the streets when he came home." Ethan held the article carefully as though it might crumble from age or the weight of its forgotten truth. He folded it along the creases and tucked it into his notebook. His chest felt tight, but not in a bad way, more like something important had settled there. Something real. Outside, through the library window, he spotted Walt crossing the street. Paper bag in one hand, moving slow but steady. No one else looked, no one waved, but Ethan saw him, and that meant something. The rest of the day felt different. Ethan's sketchbook stayed tucked under his arm, and the weight of that article burned gently in his thoughts. He knew now that the man others joked about was someone who had carried more than just old ink on his arm. He had carried others out of fire and then carried their silence when the rest of the world moved on. And Ethan, pencil still in hand, had no intention of letting that silence continue. The bell above the door jingled just as Walt Briggs settled into his usual corner booth at Ellie's diner. It was Veterans Day, but the town of Flagstone, Texas didn't celebrate it like it used to. Red, white, and blue banners fluttered from lampposts outside, and a few paper stars hung in the window. But inside the diner, things felt the same, quiet, indifferent like any other day. Walt ordered his black coffee and biscuits and gravy without needing a menu. At 72, he'd sat at that booth more mornings than he could count, and no one had ever asked why the same faded tattoo peeked from under his sleeve. Not until the teenager Ethan Campbell took interest. But Chad, the young server behind the counter, hadn't stopped his running commentary since. This morning, he leaned over to his buddies, perched on the bar stools, and said just loud enough to carry, "I still say it looks like a prison tat." One of the boys laughed into his orange soda. Walt didn't flinch. He sipped his coffee with the same slow patience he carried on patrol decades ago in the jungles of Vietnam. The jukebox hummed an old George Jones tune barely audible over the clink of dishes. Across the room, Ethan sat near the window notebook tucked to his chest, like a shield watching everything. Outside, the wind stirred fallen leaves across the sidewalk, and for a moment it felt like the world might pass this morning by in silence until the door swung open again. 4 men stepped inside. Their presence changed the air in an instant. They weren't in uniform, but the sharpness of their posture, the clipped hair, the polished shoes, all of it declared who they were. The tallest, a broad-shouldered Marine with silver at his temples and eyes like polished steel, scanned the room, then stepped forward. He stopped beside Walt's table, removed his hat, and raised a firm salute. "Permission to approach Sergeant Briggs," he said. The entire diner fell into stillness. The jukebox cut off mid-verse as if someone had pulled the plug. Forks paused mid-air. Even Chad froze at the countermouth, slightly open. Walt looked up, his gaze calm but probing. "Depends who's asking," he replied, voice even. The Marine lowered his hand and offered a nod. "General Thorne, sir. 2nd Recon, Firebase Kilo. You pulled me and the rest of my squad out when we were pinned in 68. A second man stepped forward, lean, red-eyed, younger than Thorne, but still weathered. "You dragged me through a rice field with a bullet in my leg. I never got to say thank you." Walt blinked, his hand still resting on the edge of the table. Slowly he stood. "No dramatics. Just steady movement. We all made it out," he said simply. "That's what mattered." The Marines nodded solemnly, their voices thick, with something beyond formality. Memory, perhaps. Recognition, the kind you couldn't fake. Chad stared, paling by the second. I didn't know," he muttered more to himself than anyone else. He fumbled with a coffee pot and spilled a splash onto the counter. Walt didn't turn to look at him. His focus stayed on the Marines. "Sit if you want," he said, gesturing to the booth. "My knees don't like long speeches anymore." The men smiled and slid into the bench across from him, filling the space with quiet reverence. A few regulars in the diner shifted in their seats, suddenly more aware of the honor wall near the restroom that had gone mostly unnoticed for years. Ethan, still seated by the window, slowly opened his notebook and began to draw, his hands steady, his face unreadable. Sarah, the waitress, appeared from behind the counter with 2 glasses of lemonade and a plate of pie. She didn't speak. She just placed them on the table gently and nodded once at Walt. For the first time all morning, his eyes softened. "Maria's recipe?" he asked. Sarah smiled. "Her niece sent it over last night." A moment passed, and then another. The jukebox clicked softly back to life, playing the Marines' hymn this time, not by accident. Walt lifted his coffee, now warm again, and took a long sip. No one clapped. No one cheered. But everyone remembered. Respect didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it just walked through the door and saluted. After the Marines left Ellie's diner that morning, the silence they'd left behind wasn't awkward, it was sacred. No one returned to idle chatter. The air felt different now. Something had shifted in the heart of the little town, something that couldn't be undone. Sarah, the owner of the diner, stood behind the counter, still holding the empty coffee pot in her hand. Her eyes drifted to the back wall near the restrooms, a cluttered corkboard where flyers for yoga classes, lost dogs, and outdated specials had been tacked up for years. Without saying a word, she walked over and began removing the old papers one by one. A bakery coupon from last summer. A reminder about bingo night that had long since passed. Slowly, she cleared space for something new. When Walt noticed what she was doing, he didn't say anything at first, but after a long sip of his now cold coffee, he reached into the inside pocket of his weathered jacket and pulled out a folded envelope and a creased photograph. He stood, slowly walked over to the counter and laid them in Sarah's hands. Her name was Maria Sanchez, he said, voice low but steady. She was a Navy corpsman in Nam, saved more lives than I could count, including mine. She never made it home. Sarah opened the envelope, gently revealing a handwritten letter. The edges were frayed, the ink faded, but the handwriting was neat and strong. Alongside it, the photograph showed a smiling young woman in fatigues, her arms slung around two other Marines. Behind them, sandbags and the outline of a helicopter pad. She gave me that letter the night she died, Walt continued. Asked me to deliver it to her brother. I never found him. I never opened it. Didn't feel like it was mine to read. But maybe now, maybe this is where it belongs. Sarah's fingers trembled as she pinned the photo to the top of the board, just above a fresh piece of paper labeled Honor Wall in block letters. Beneath it, she placed the letter in a clear sleeve sealed to protect it, yet open for all to see. Across the diner, Ethan sat watching in silence, his notebook open but untouched. He walked slowly over, stopping beside Walt at the counter. "Will you tell me about her?" Ethan asked, almost in a whisper. Walt nodded and sat back down in his booth, motioning for Ethan to join him. The boy slid into the seat across from him, pencil in hand. "She was tiny," Walt said with a soft chuckle. "Couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds soaking wet. But when the bullets started flying, she never flinched. Always ran toward the sound, not away. Had a mouth like a sailor, but a heart big enough to carry us all." He paused, staring out the window at the drifting leaves. She used to sing after firefights, said it helped the wounded breathe easier, wrote letters for the guys who couldn't, always carried extra pencils in her pocket. Ethan nodded, eyes wide. "I'll write her story. I want people to know," good Walt said, finally allowing a faint smile. She earned that. Back at the counter, Sarah added another frame, this time a typed placard that read, "In honor of Maria Sanchez, U.S. Navy Corpsman, 1948-1968. She served with courage, healed with love, and sang when the silence was too heavy." As the lunch crowd trickled in, people paused by the wall. A truck driver took off his cap. A teacher placed her hand over her heart. What began with a faded tattoo had become something greater, a bridge between memory and gratitude. In the days that followed Veterans Day, Ellie's diner no longer felt like just a breakfast stop on Main Street. Something had shifted, not just in the decor, but in the people. The framed photo of Maria Sanchez now hung beneath a folded American flag, with a single white candle flickering gently beside it. Every morning, Sarah lit that candle before the doors opened, and no one questioned why. Customers now paused at the wall, some bowing their heads, others simply standing a little longer than necessary, remembering someone they'd once known, or someone they never got the chance to. Ethan returned a few mornings later, shyly handing Walt Briggs a stapled packet of papers. Inside was a typed story, a tribute to the man with the quiet booth by the window, and the tattoo no one had bothered to understand. The pages told of Walt's service, of Maria's courage, and of a forgotten honor that had finally found its voice. Walt didn't say much as he read it, but when he finished, he folded the packet carefully and tucked it behind the same envelope that held Maria's last letter. Ched, the once sarcastic server, no longer joked or rolled his eyes. He now tied his apron neatly and cleared tables with care. One morning, he left a folded napkin on Walt's table with just 7 handwritten words. "Thank you for letting me see clearly." Walt didn't reply. He didn't need to. Now, each Veterans Day, instead of ignoring the date, Ellie's hosts a quiet morning gathering. No speeches, no banners, just black coffee, warm biscuits, and a community finally remembering what truly matters. Veterans come in early, welcomed with firm handshakes and seats reserved at the window. And behind the counter, the jukebox plays softly, not just music, but memory. Sometimes it only takes one question, one sketch, or one act of remembrance to heal what silence has buried. Honor doesn't always arrive in uniform, and courage doesn't always speak out loud. In a world that moves too fast, pausing to truly see someone like Walt Briggs can remind us that history isn't just what's written in books, but what's carried in hearts and scars. If this story moved, you leave a comment below, maybe share the name of a veteran who deserves to be remembered. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that honor the quiet heroes among us, because sometimes the loudest impact comes from those who never asked to be seen.